Hello and welcome back to the Pirate Players Then and Now podcast. I am your football enthusiast, TJ Jones, and I'm here with a very special guest, my brother, class of 2003. Wesley, what is your class? What do y'all?
I was just thinking about that. I got to remember for a minute. I think it's Ogre Fi Ogre 11, I
Okay.
believe.
All right. All right. You and I, we talk about Hampton a lot. You humor me a lot. As you know, I like to talk about these things. You got a lot bigger things going on. But in general, you have always been very supportive of the institution. We are both third generation Hamptonians, and I think that puts us in a special place. And yet, we definitely look at sports a little differently individually. And what I wanted to do here was to invite you to, as I've been talking about the football team and its legacy and history and some of what it's meant to me, but not only looking to the past, we're also looking towards the future. And so, because you were a few years behind me and ultimately have a slightly different perspective on some of these things, and thus far, the football team is, had some struggles. But we were supposed to talk at the beginning of the year about what success looks like for Hampton, or just generally around a successful football program, and both this year and I think more broadly. I certainly would not define it necessarily as a 1-4 start. However, I am not so much focused only on the record, and so there's more to it than that. But how do you in different perspective, different thought process, define success for the football team or the football program?
And we talked about, like you said, it would have been nice maybe earlier in the year to do this because we were all hyped up, right? Ready for the year to start. All these grand ambitions about what success can look like, no matter however you phrase it. From my point of view, from your point of view, when you're 0-0 and the year is about to start, the world is yours, so to speak, right? But 1-4 start, things have changed, but we can still go backwards in time, right? A little bit. Think about what a successful season would have been. So I was using AI, right, with you before the season.
Right.
Because, my issue has always been as a Hamptonian, watching football, whether it's the NFL or, University of Alabama, let's say, right? There's a clear goal at the beginning of the year. It's to win the national championship, win the SEC. Those are like the primary goals, right? Or beat your rival, right? Those are like the three primary goals, right? And it's always been growing up, going to Hampton, that it seems like there was no goal, at least from the outside looking in. It's always like, okay, well, we'll beat Norfolk State and we'll beat our, whoever's playing homecoming. But it's more about the band halftime show than it is actually like any real goals on the field. So we'll unpack this as we're talking, but I think that's where I was coming from. It's always kind of frustrating as a true football fan like you are, right? Who loves Hampton and loves all the things about it, but also wants to see success. And what does success look like at this level, whether you're FCS or D2 or whatever? What are the things that a coach is hyping up their players and saying, okay, here's the bulletin board material. Here are the things that we're going to go after. For Hampton, just off the top of my head, right? It starts with maybe beating your rivals, right? Norfolk State, Howard. Okay. Those are the easy ones, right? Everybody can kind of understand those, or whoever we're playing for homecoming. Fine. But then you're in the CAA, right? So is it winning the CAA? Okay. Well, then after that, then what? That's where I've gotten into, and the frustration begins, right? Because there is no Celebration Bowl ambitions for Hampton, right? Because we're not in the MEAC, right? Or the SWAC. So that's not something we can look forward to in a sense. So then is it getting to the FCS playoffs? And then is it winning the FCS playoffs? And then there's other goals like, recruiting goals, NIL goals, there's fundraising goals. Those are things that we can talk through in a little bit. But I think just to summarize, I'm kind of in a space where, I don't want it to just be, we're going to watch the first half, watch the halftime show and roll out, right? I want to feel like this season means something. There's a goal at the end that is going to make us feel just as excited as if we went to University of Alabama at a smaller scale or something like that. So that's kind of where I wanted the conversation to go. Yeah.
Well, I think you articulated that really well, as far as your understanding and frustration. And I don't get frustrated like that because I have a different lens, let's say, as it relates to this stuff. Um,
Mhm.
I will say that prior to his departure, Eddie George was making some of that noise, right? He was doing well at Tennessee State, and people were still, kind of showing up and rolling out at halftime, and after the show, and he was, frustrated with the culture, right? That's a cultural question, which extends beyond Hampton University, I think, to overall to the HBCU culture, which is, the band is a huge part of why people attend the games as part of the family atmosphere. And, I think that that becomes a challenge as we move into this new dynamic, right? As we talk about transfer portals and NILs, right? There's really going to come a moment, and maybe coming quicker than we can, grasp, around what does it look like to have a successful program, and what do you really, I'm more curious about what, and I'm not just talking about Hampton, but what are all of these preeminent HBCUs willing to sacrifice of their culture to have a program that um, is a winning program, however you define that, right? Or successful program, right? So I think that's really why I don't get so immediately stressed, because there is a very interesting balance that easily can be disturbed here if we decide we're going to try to be the FCS champion. Then what does that take? What do you have to sacrifice in order to facilitate that type of scenario, right? I don't know the answer to that. I know that folks have become. I've heard it said that folks are frustrated we don't have the types of crowds at the games that the larger institutions, that are PWI institutions would have, and one we have, I think we have crowds that are consistent with other FCS programs, for the most part. But the point being that in order to have those types of crowds, what do you have to be willing to sacrifice? For example, I heard tell that there's a lot of alcohol sold at those games, and most HBCUs are dry campuses. And so that's a major difference
Mhm.
in how they're filling their crowds. Now, of course, the games are exciting and so forth and so on, but that is a part of what's happening in those spaces. And I don't think that HBCUs, but Hampton in particular, since we're talking about Hampton, is willing to do that. Nor do I think they should be, right? But that's just one element of this whole success question, that I don't think you're necessarily talking about crowds either. I think you're more talking about, what is the clear goal for any particular year, as far as
Uh-huh.
winning is concerned. But I think that balance between what is historically what the fans show up for versus what the alumni and students show up for versus um, the we'll call it the more diehard football fan.
Exactly, right. I think everybody has different meanings of what a successful season is, right? And I think you've kind of moved into an angle where, you're trying to balance this delicate balance of I want to be successful on the field, but I want to have my integrity preserved as an institution, right? So I respect that. And you've made comments in the past, or maybe we shouldn't have scholarships at all. Maybe we should go back down a level to like D2 and just kind of focus on go all in on the academics. And I actually don't disagree with that, because if there's not a bigger goal, we're winning the CAA, we're going to the FCS, then if there's not an easy for all of us to buy in on goal for the year, then what does it matter? What does it matter if we're winning games or losing games? Why don't we just entertain the crowd, beat our rival, and don't give scholarships and focus on the academics? But clearly, we're not there, right? We moved out of the MEAC for the CIA, clearly for some kind of bigger aspirations as an institution, right? With money attached to that, like any other thing, right? So if we're gonna be making moves, and we can talk about this more later, but I didn't want us to leave the MEAC because I felt like we should be doubling down on our HBCU culture, right? Not trying to move into spaces where it's a blurry line between HBCU and not HBCU. But anyway, we are where we are now, along with A&T, and others may follow. So if we're going to chase the almighty dollar in that way, then we better have some real clear defined goals and aspirations, not only for what success looks like, but then what does that success bring to the institution? Does that bring more scholarships? Does that bring more buildings on campus, better facilities, et cetera? So, I think we need to choose a lane in this world here. And then, pick an FCS school like a North Dakota State. Well, it's a very small area, but they're all in because there is no NFL team or major college team in North Dakota that I know of, right? So they're all can rally around that and say our big thing every year is North Dakota State and South Dakota State and Montana State. I get that. So can we embrace that? HBCU athletics and what that brings. Seems like we're not really sure, right? We're like we got one foot in, one foot out when it comes to going, where the North Dakota State, South Dakota States are in terms of how they embrace their athletics. We're sort of like still in this entertainment thing. It's like, well, the band is more important than the football. But we're moving into conferences acting like it's not that way. And we're doubling down on NIL money and things like that, trying to play in a different space. So I'd like us to choose our lane, figure out what we want to be. To your point, we want to take a step back and take away scholarships and be more about academics. Fine. But if we're going to be still chasing this, ambition about football, then let's really figure out what that does that mean and make it really clearly defined. And let's go after that goal. Right? You know?
Well, I think you should bring up a number of great points. As far as the conference thing is concerned, I've said all along, certainly was not involved in the decision making, and certainly don't have a particular axe to grind there. But I've firmly believed that that was more about all the other sports, not football. Um, when it comes right down to it, and football had its success. We may have been a little bit ambitious as to what we thought we could do in the CAA as far as football is concerned, and certainly we've had some success, in spots. But I do believe that was truly about other sports, and we've had some success in other sports, having moved into the CAA. So I, I I think that you are right, particularly around picking a lane around football specifically. That is something that may come to light from what I hear, although I cannot say I've confirmed it. You can now, with the changes in all the rules, split divisions around your sports. So the football team could be D2 and the rest of the programs be CAA D1, or the football team could be FCS non-scholarship. I've long said that we should be more of a pioneer league type school where we don't give scholarships, but we take students that are high academic who but still want to play football. And if you're going to be in um, a PWI conference, be in a conference that matches your academic rigor. But, if, as you said, we're going to pick a lane, if we stay where we are, then the amount of resources that we're going to have to allocate to football is going to have to grow exponentially to be competitive in the upper echelon, even with the top teams currently moving on to other conferences, the Richmonds and the William and Marys and the University of Delaware's, right? They have all moved on or moving on. And even with that, to be particularly competitive at the top of the CAA conference, we're going to have to make a significant commitment, not we, you and I, but the school as a whole. And, alumni, everyone, um, and I unfortunately think that also will mean a compromising of other things. What those other things are, but a compromising of other things. And that will be very interesting to see because, I'm not sure that the institution is prepared to take those types of steps.
Yeah, I'd love to know what the internal struggle is in the institution or any of these schools in terms of, do you have half the board saying we don't want to play in this space? it's not our lane. It's not, the incentives aren't there. Let's just pull back and focus on the basics, or is how many are like, look, we know there's a lot of money out there, and we can get a part of that. And how do we do that? I think they're picking their lane, and I think we'll know over the next few years how they want to play this. But again, as a spectator, as a fan, as somebody who went to the school, just looking back when I was there in good old 2003, right? 2000, whatever, 2001, and just thinking like, how many times did I talk to anybody and we went to these games and it was like, man, wasn't just like a social activity. I know that's part of it, right? It is a social activity, right? It's like, oh, we're going to the Hampton game, or we're going up to Howard to beat our rival. But I don't think I've ever talked to anybody other than you, maybe, who says, okay, there's what's the bigger picture here, right? It's just fun. And if somebody's passionate, I'm a Seattle Seahawks fan, there's a goal every year. It's win a Super Bowl or win the NFC West. Or if you're a Penn State fan or a Florida State fan, it's to win your conference and get to the playoffs. And, having a goal, I think, in every aspect of life is important. And there's you set all your goals out and you try to, check, make half your goals great. So as a fan, it just felt like now that I'm a little older and I'm taking just a step back, I'm like, yeah, it's always just been a party. It's just always been like, hey, homecoming, we're playing some random team and we're just here having a good time. And half of us are not paying attention to the game. Half of us are just waiting for the band to come and then we're checked out. I want to feel like there's and thanks to you, I actually care more about this stuff, right? With Hampton. Like, okay, now you start looking at the details of who they're recruiting and like, okay, well, okay, let's get excited about actually what's happening on the field more so than just beating our rival and the band's playing. All right, I'd like to see us win a championship and get to a bigger aspiration. And how does that affect the school? If my school wins the CAA and gets to the FCS round two, does that add another $5 million to Hampton's endowment? And we can do so. I don't know. So I'd like there just to be more at this point in my life. I'd like to see us have a bigger goal than just entertain the alumni till halftime, and nobody cares about our record or what the ambition is for the year. That's all I'm really saying as somebody who cares about sports, watches sports, and now knows a little bit more intricate details about how Hampton's operating from a sports point of view because of you. I want to see some real things to be excited about and root for as a goal.
Right. And that's why I wanted you to come on and talk because, like I said, you have a very honest perspective as it relates to these things. I don't know how much I've had to do with that, but certainly you and you have gone to games, in the time in between and had a really good time in different spaces and places. And, I'm talking about after I graduated and, even after I think you graduated, we've just gone to stuff and just had a good time watching the game. Yes, the band was there and all that. It was all fun, but we
Right.
were watching the game. We watched the whole game. We enjoyed the game, which I think that is something that is a very real question. I definitely think every year the leadership intends to win, right? Wants to go out and be successful in the conference that they're in, whether it be the MEAC before, the Big South, the CAA. I mean, when I got to Hampton, Hampton was still in the CIAA, right? And, so I think they always intend to go out and win and be successful. But I think the larger point is that we don't make that a goal for the entire community, right? It's a goal for the players, it's a goal for the staff, the coaches, so forth, and even administration. But to your point, I'm not sure that the larger alumni base cares at all, right, about that part of it. And that's what makes it difficult to change culture, in this entire process, right? So folks have to kind of get on board with the idea that we're going to try to win this conference. We're going to do certain things. Now, like I said, I appreciate the larger narratives, right? And you see, like if I'm out on X, I have been very vocal about some of the young men who play for the team, who, and some of their backstories and some of the resiliency that they've shown. That's the stuff that I like to see or be, known. That's the larger Hampton stories that I think are going to be more memorable when they hang up the cleats, because I think that's what makes, a Hamptonian. But again, you said it very well. If we want to be in these leagues and to be successful, the landscape is shifting. And honestly, I don't think it really even matters if we go back to the MEAC. The landscape has shifted, period. So you have to decide how much resource and how much cultural shift you're willing to accept in order to be successful in this new paradigm. And that may be the issue, that is the internal struggle that the organization is either already dealing with or is preparing to deal with or is about to be blindsided by. I don't know, obviously, the answer. I am nowhere near, but I am very honest to say that, you and I played high school football and I coached a little and we've had a good time. And we went to Hampton and were spectators at different points and, enjoyed our experiences and now give back to the institution in a variety of ways, both financially and through vocal support. And yet we're not involved directly in these conversations. So, it is my sincere hope that those who are in the room where it happens, to steal something from Hamilton, right, are aware that this will not be a easy fix.
It's yeah, and I don't want a guy like you who's I think again the backstories, the morality, the history means so much to you, right? And I don't want you to get disappointed as money becomes a bigger issue, even at this level, to have few people come in and just here, and then you realize they're not here really for the school. They're not here because of Hampton tradition and Hampton or an HBCU, anything. They're here because it's just an opportunity, and as soon as they get a better opportunity, they're leaving. Right, and that's hard to to square. So if you don't have scholarships, if you don't have NIL, likely people aren't going to be doing that, right? They're going to be here for 4 years, and they want to be, well, they probably still want an opportunity to play, but maybe they will be more ripe to lean into the history of Hampton and HBCU culture, and they'll stay a while. But yeah, this is not this whole world we're living in is a rent a person world, right? I don't believe anybody really wants to be here because they believe in Hampton's tradition or HBCU culture. You're more likely to find that for people who are legacy students here. Not, I don't trust anybody who's here, and I'm probably very wrong when I say that, but I think the majority of people are just here because they love the sport they played all throughout junior high school, elementary school, and they just want an opportunity. Is giving them the current opportunity, and if they do well enough on tape, they're gonna move on to the next place. And it's nothing personal. It's just business, and that's just what it is, right? You know.
Well, and and you said it right. That's when I get depressed, right? And
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and and that's when I, choose to focus on, even in this podcast, right? I choose to focus on younger guys who had just come to the institution because the hope is they could, they'll stay and enjoy it, or graduating seniors who have been there and stayed and are going to have a piece of paper that says Hampton University on it, and hopefully that means something to them, right? That's how I've tried to square the shifting landscape, trying not to focus on the very difficult way in which the institution that I love is now treated as a commodity.
Yeah, and I kind of, as I'm thinking of that, I'm thinking how we go full circle here, right? That's why I want success to be defined, right? Because if X amount of this success, even in this rent-a-player world, right? But if that can lead us to have X amount of success that puts X amount more money into our endowment, and that brings the next great engineer or chemist or whatever out of Hampton University that wins the Nobel Prize or does something great, then maybe that's the price we pay, right? I mean, maybe you just stop being so invested in the athletes being, holding on to this legacy and the history, and just let them, fulfill their ambitions, get their scholarships, maybe move on in a year. But they are allowing us to get to a goal that's better for the greater good of all of the Hampton students and students to come by bringing more attention, money, spotlight to the school that puts more money, that allows us to build better buildings, hire teachers, scholarships, and produce alumni from here with that piece of paper, and they go on to do great things in this world. So I can be at peace with that
Mm.
personally. But you know, we'll see if I don't know if you can. You know, so that's the question. Yeah.
Hey man, I'm holding out hope, but I realize that I am in the minority, or at least I feel like I'm in the minority, and that's why if you notice, oftentimes I'll start my show by reminding people that I am not a unicorn, because I'm really reminding myself that I am not a unicorn, right? That there's still some people out here that believe in um, the student athlete as a real thing. And that's why I started the podcast talking about, Dr. Benson, right? Who was all athlete and all world athlete and all world in the classroom.
Mhm.
But stuff like that isn't really discussed anymore. And it's because of the changing nature of where we are. So, you know, I appreciate you. I think the rest of this season, by the way, is going to be interesting, but it's because of this transition that the institution is finding its way through. By the way, I don't think that any of this is unique to Hampton at all. This problem is pervasive across the HBCU landscape, and certainly, if not pervasive across the stronger academic FCS programs, um, where it will continue to be difficult to retain higher caliber, or at least perceived higher caliber athletes, because of transfer portal and the resources that they, at least right now, can command via NIL money. One of the things we know, though, is that our home by the sea is not hurting for applications. Lots and lots and lots of applications, huge surges in applications to fill those slots. And so my hope is that we can continue to attract the student athlete as well, and then find our way to the right conference, the right level that matches us. So, in other words, don't let the tail wag the dog, right? Where
Mhm.
we change our ways in order to facilitate being successful in a conference, but instead find the right conference that allows us to retain the type of students that we want to have. But I feel like that's a losing battle, unfortunately.
Well, I mean, you're fighting a good fight, man. I'm glad somebody has to like have the counter argument for this new world as we transition. It's hard, right? It's hard to be in your shoes, right? Because you're trying to be very authentic and historian based and stuff like that, which I'm glad you're having that position because everybody else is, kind of succumbed to this NIL transfer portal world, even in this level we have here. So for me, I want a little bit of both, right? I care about the Hampton has deep history, HBCU. Our family has deep history at Hampton University, but I'm also a realist in terms of where we are in terms of society with the money that's influencing things and the fact that kids are coming here not because they necessarily love Hampton University, but because it's where they're going to have an opportunity to play and get a scholarship and get some NIL money, right? So, and as soon as there's a better deal down the street, literally, they'll be out, and that sucks to say, but then how can I square up? Then I can be at peace to say, you know what, if you come here and you help our team win the CAA, and then say that by winning the CAA, that could add 20 more scholarships to Hampton for next year for the academics, not for athletes, then maybe I'm at peace with that. You're basically entertaining us in a sense. You're bringing eyeballs and money, and you're allowing us to push the academic narrative elsewhere. And maybe that's okay.
I I sincerely, I'm gonna bring this to a close, but I sincerely hope you are correct, because my
Uh,
fear, honestly, is that we begin to cannibalize academic scholarships and academic resources for athletic resources. And, that's a slippery slope that you can get on. But some of what
mhm.
I feel is that's where we're going. And you know, that's again brings me to that depressed state.
Well, if it ends up being some kind of math formula that somebody smarter than us knows, where it says like every $2 we invest into the football program or the athletic program, it's $4 in return in the academics. I'll take that math if that's what it ends up being, right? If it's a $2 goes into athletics and it's a dollar out in the reverse, then that's not a good deal for the institution as a whole. So I'm hoping there's an equation here that says, the better we do on the field, the more we invest in NIL and whatever, the more we're doing right by the future of all the academic programs at Hampton University, right?
Um, hey, people that are, paid more than we are specifically to think about these things. So I'll do my best to go and enjoy the Norfolk State game with my season tickets this weekend, and I'm thankful that you're going to come and hang out with me. So thanks for jumping on. Appreciate you. This has been the Pirate Players Then and Now podcast with your host TJ Jones and my special guest Wesley. Take care.